Most geopolitical rivalries begin with a clear enemy, a border dispute, a territorial claim, a competing ideology, a long history of conflict that leaves little room for misunderstanding. But some of the most consequential rivalries in history emerge in a very different way. They begin when two powers suddenly realize they are chasing the same future. Not because they hate each other, not because they planned for confrontation, but because circumstances change, old assumptions collapse, and a space opens up that both believe they are uniquely qualified to fill. The modern Middle East may be entering exactly such a moment. For years, analysts viewed the region through familiar lenses. Iran projected influence across multiple fronts. Israel focused on maintaining its military edge. Turkey balanced its position between Europe, Asia, and the Arab world while expanding its regional footprint. The Gulf states concentrated on economic transformation and strategic diversification. The United States remained the ultimate security guarantor, the power whose decisions could alter the calculations of every major actor. Yet the assumptions that define that order are beginning to shift. And when assumptions shift, power relationships often shift with them. What makes this moment so significant is that no government officially acknowledges the scale of the transition underway. Publicly, leaders continue speaking the language of continuity. Alliances remain strong. Existing institutions remain functional. Security partnerships continue operating. Yet beneath these reassurances lies a growing recognition that the Middle East of the next decade may not resemble the Middle East of the last 3 decades. The region is becoming more competitive, more independent, and in many ways more unpredictable. Countries that once relied heavily on external powers are increasingly pursuing their own strategic ambitions. They are building domestic defense industries, expanding diplomatic influence, investing in advanced technology, and developing economic partnerships that reduce dependence on any single international actor. The result is a region gradually evolving from one dominated by a few central power centers into a far more complex strategic landscape. Turkey represents one of the clearest examples of this transformation. For much of the 20th century, its strategic identity was defined primarily by its relationship with the West. As a NATO member positioned at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, Turkey occupied a unique place in the international system. It was often viewed as a bridge between civilizations, a country whose geography granted it immense strategic importance. Yet geography alone does not create influence. Influence emerges when geography is combined with ambition, economic capacity, military capability, and political vision. Over the past 2 decades, Turkey has increasingly sought to translate its geographic advantages into broader regional influence. Its investments in domestic defense production, drone technology, naval modernization, and diplomatic outreach reflect a long-term effort to become not merely an important regional state, but a central player in shaping regional outcomes. Israel, meanwhile, enters this period from a very different position. Its strategic advantages have traditionally rested upon technological superiority, intelligence capabilities, military effectiveness, and deep international partnerships. Unlike larger regional powers, Israel has often compensated for geographic and demographic limitations through innovation and strategic planning. This approach has proven remarkably effective. Over decades, Israel developed some of the most sophisticated defense capabilities in the world, enabling it to operate in a highly challenging security environment. Yet success creates its own challenges. When a nation becomes accustomed to holding a decisive advantage, even modest changes in the regional balance can attract intense attention. Strategic planners naturally focus not only on current threats, but also on potential future competitors whose capabilities may grow over time. This dynamic becomes especially important when examining advanced military technologies. Modern fighter aircraft, missile defense systems, drones, cyber capabilities, and artificial intelligence are not simply weapons. They are instruments that shape perceptions of power. Governments pay close attention to who possesses these capabilities because they influence strategic calculations far beyond any individual battlefield scenario. Yet military technology alone rarely determines geopolitical outcomes. History repeatedly demonstrates that industrial capacity, economic resilience, diplomatic relationships, and political adaptability often matter just as much. Great powers rarely rise or decline because of a single weapon system. They rise or decline because of their ability to integrate military strength with broader national capabilities. The broader strategic environment further complicates these calculations. Across the Middle East, governments are adapting to a world where traditional assumptions about security and economics are changing simultaneously. Energy markets are evolving. Technological competition is accelerating. Supply chains are being reassessed. New partnerships are emerging across regions that previously maintained limited interaction. Countries increasingly pursue flexible diplomatic strategies designed to maximize opportunities while minimizing dependence. This flexibility reflects a recognition that the future international system may be more distributed than the one that emerged after the Cold War. In such an environment, influence belongs not only to the strongest states, but also to the most adaptable ones. One of the most fascinating aspects of this transformation is that competition does not always resemble conflict. Rival powers often cooperate in some areas while competing intensely in others. A country may serve as an economic partner, a diplomatic intermediary, and a strategic competitor simultaneously. This complexity challenges traditional geopolitical narratives that divide states neatly into allies and adversaries. Modern international politics operates in shades of gray. Governments pursue overlapping interests where cooperation is beneficial, while preserving freedom of action where interests diverge. Understanding this reality is essential because it explains why relationships that appear contradictory from the outside often make perfect strategic sense from within. The role of the United States remains central to these developments, but even American policymakers increasingly recognize that the nature of leadership is changing. During previous eras, Washington often exercised influence through exclusive security guarantees, military partnerships, and access to advanced technology. These tools remain important, but they now exist within a more competitive international environment. Other major powers have expanded economic engagement across the Middle East. Regional governments possess greater confidence in pursuing independent policies. Domestic industries increasingly provide capabilities that once required external support. None of this means American influence has disappeared. Rather, it suggests that influence must now be exercised within a more crowded and dynamic strategic landscape. History offers numerous examples of similar transitions. Periods of geopolitical change often produce uncertainty not because existing powers suddenly become weak, but because emerging realities create new opportunities for others. The rise of new actors does not automatically require the decline of established ones. Multiple centers of influence can coexist. Yet coexistence requires adjustment. Governments must reconsider assumptions, reassess priorities, and adapt strategies to changing circumstances. Those that adapt successfully often preserve and even expand their influence. Those that resist change may discover that yesterday's advantages no longer guarantee tomorrow's success. The most important question, therefore, is not which country will dominate the Middle East. The region is too diverse, too interconnected, and too strategically significant for simple dominance by any single actor. The more relevant question is, which governments can best navigate an era defined by technological transformation, economic competition, diplomatic complexity, and shifting power relationships? Success will belong not merely to those possessing military strength, but to those capable of integrating strength with flexibility, innovation, and long-term strategic thinking. As the next decade unfolds, the Middle East is likely to become one of the world's most important laboratories for understanding how power evolves in the 21st century. Regional actors are no longer content simply reacting to external decisions. They are increasingly shaping outcomes themselves. New technologies are changing the nature of military and economic competition. Alliances are becoming more flexible. Strategic influence is becoming more distributed. The headlines may continue focusing on individual disputes, diplomatic controversies, or military developments, but the deeper story lies elsewhere. It lies in the gradual emergence of a new regional order whose contours remain uncertain, but whose arrival appears increasingly difficult to ignore. The governments that recognize this transformation earliest may be the ones best positioned to shape what comes next. If there is one lesson that history repeats with remarkable consistency, it is that geopolitical influence is never permanent. Every era produces a dominant power that appears almost unchallengeable. Every generation grows accustomed to believing that the existing international order is simply the natural state of the world. Yet history rarely stands still. Economic centers shift, military technologies evolve, new alliances emerge while old ones gradually lose relevance. Countries that were once considered peripheral become indispensable, while those that once dictated the rules discover that influence must constantly be renewed rather than inherited. The Middle East has become one of the clearest examples of this ongoing transformation because it sits at the intersection of energy security, global trade, military competition, technological innovation, and great power diplomacy. Every major actor understands that what happens in this region rarely stays confined to the region itself. Decisions made in Ankara, Jerusalem, Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, Tehran, Cairo, or Washington increasingly shape financial markets, energy policy, and diplomatic strategy across the entire international system. One of the most remarkable developments over the past 2 decades has been the rapid evolution of domestic defense industries throughout the region. In previous generations, military capability depended largely upon acquiring equipment from foreign suppliers. Today, many regional governments have concluded that long-term strategic independence requires something more ambitious. Instead of relying exclusively on imports, they have invested billions of dollars in research institutions, aerospace engineering, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, advanced manufacturing, missile technology, naval construction, and unmanned systems. These investments are not simply about producing new military hardware. They represent an effort to build national ecosystems capable of sustaining innovation over decades. Countries increasingly recognize that technological independence provides diplomatic flexibility because it reduces vulnerability to political disagreements that might otherwise disrupt access to critical equipment or spare parts. Turkey's experience illustrates this broader trend particularly well. Rather than measuring success solely through imported platforms, policymakers increasingly focused on developing an industrial base capable of designing, manufacturing, and exporting indigenous technologies. Unmanned aerial systems became one of the earliest symbols of this transformation, demonstrating that countries outside the traditional defense industrial powers could successfully compete in advanced military markets. More importantly, these developments generated valuable engineering expertise that extended beyond individual products. Universities expanded research programs, private firms entered high-technology sectors, and government agencies encouraged collaboration across industries that previously operated independently. Over time, defense modernization became intertwined with broader economic development, creating a cycle in which technological progress supported both national security and industrial competitiveness. This pattern extends far beyond any single country. Across the Middle East, governments increasingly view innovation as a strategic resource equal in importance to geography or natural resources. Artificial intelligence, satellite communications, electronic warfare, quantum research, biotechnology, and advanced computing have all become areas of intense investment. Unlike traditional military competitions, these technologies influence virtually every aspect of national power simultaneously. They affect healthcare, education, transportation, finance, manufacturing, intelligence gathering, and military planning. Consequently, technological leadership has become one of the defining measures of geopolitical influence in the 21st century. Nations capable of integrating scientific research with economic growth and security planning gain advantages that extend well beyond conventional military capabilities. At the same time, economic diversification has emerged as another defining priority throughout the region. For decades, discussions about Middle Eastern economies focused overwhelmingly on hydrocarbons. While energy exports remain enormously important, governments increasingly recognize that long-term prosperity depends upon broader economic foundations. Investment in tourism, logistics, renewable energy, financial services, advanced manufacturing, digital infrastructure, and education reflects an effort to prepare for a future in which economic resilience depends upon multiple industries rather than a single source of national income. This transformation is significant because diversified economies generally possess greater flexibility during periods of geopolitical uncertainty. They are better positioned to absorb external shocks, attract international investment, and maintain domestic stability even when global markets experience volatility. Diplomatic strategy has evolved alongside these economic changes. Regional governments increasingly avoid rigid alignments that limit future flexibility. Instead, they cultivate relationships with multiple global partners simultaneously. A country may cooperate with one power on defense, another on infrastructure, another on technology, and another on trade. This multidirectional diplomacy reflects the recognition that international politics is becoming increasingly interconnected. Rather than viewing global affairs through a single strategic framework, policymakers seek opportunities wherever mutual interests exist. Such an approach requires careful balancing because maintaining productive relationships with competing global powers demands extraordinary diplomatic skill. Yet many governments consider this flexibility essential for preserving strategic autonomy in an uncertain international environment. Meanwhile, the importance of information has expanded dramatically. Previous generations often associated power primarily with territory, industrial production, or military strength. Today, information itself has become a strategic asset. Governments invest heavily in cybersecurity, intelligence analysis, satellite surveillance, digital infrastructure, and strategic communications, because controlling information increasingly influences political stability, economic confidence, and military effectiveness. Public opinion can shift rapidly in response to online narratives, financial markets react instantly to emerging news, and diplomatic initiatives are scrutinized by global audiences in real time. As a result, managing information has become inseparable from managing national security. Every major geopolitical event now unfolds simultaneously across television networks, social media platforms, intelligence assessments, financial markets, and diplomatic negotiations, creating an environment where perception evolves almost as quickly as reality itself. The growing role of younger generations also deserves attention. Throughout the Middle East, demographic change is gradually reshaping political and economic priorities. Large youth populations bring new expectations regarding employment, education, entrepreneurship, digital connectivity, and participation in global markets. Governments increasingly recognize that long-term stability depends not only upon military preparedness, but also upon creating opportunities capable of sustaining social and economic progress. Investments in universities, innovation hubs, startup ecosystems, and advanced research therefore serve multiple purposes. They strengthen economic competitiveness while simultaneously addressing broader national development objectives. In this sense, human capital has become one of the most valuable strategic resources available to any nation, often determining long-term success more decisively than natural resources alone. These interconnected trends suggest that the future balance of power will depend upon far more than military alliances or defense spending. Countries that successfully combine technological innovation, economic diversification, institutional resilience, educational excellence, diplomatic flexibility, and strategic patience are likely to enjoy significant advantages regardless of their geographic size. Power in the 21st century increasingly reflects the ability to integrate diverse forms of national strength into coherent long-term strategies rather than relying upon any single source of influence. This reality challenges many traditional assumptions about international politics, while creating new opportunities for states capable of adapting quickly to changing global conditions. Looking toward the coming decades, it becomes increasingly clear that the Middle East is entering a period defined less by fixed alliances and more by dynamic partnerships. Competition will undoubtedly remain, and disagreements over security, territory, and regional influence are unlikely to disappear. Yet alongside this competition exists a growing recognition that economic development, technological progress, and regional stability are interconnected objectives that cannot be pursued entirely in isolation. The governments that understand this balance, competing where necessary while cooperating where possible, may ultimately prove the most influential. History rarely rewards those who prepare only for yesterday's challenges. It consistently favors those capable of anticipating tomorrow's opportunities before they become obvious to everyone else. The Middle East now stands at precisely such a crossroads, where the decisions made today will shape not merely regional politics, but the architecture of international relations throughout much of the 21st century.